This is part 5 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 2 Drill Press Rebuild Series. If you haven't seen part 4, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be stripping paint and cleaning up the table. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Picking up where we left off from part 4, we've got the column that has been soaking in simple green inside this PVC pipe. And I'm going to reclaim the simple green in that blue bucket there. And that was a clump of ice. That's how cold it was here in Georgia when I was doing all of this. So once I've got most of the simple green out of there, I'll go ahead and get that pipe or the column to slide down so that we can grab it. Now it's really slippery. And we don't want it to slide back inside the pipe because it'll bust the end cap off of the end of the pipe. I'll just set that aside for a minute, seeing if it was going to stand up on its own, but not so much. Then we'll rinse off the column, get all that simple green and everything it carried with it off of the column, inside and outside. And I rinse out the PVC pipe as well so that we can use it to de-rust the column in a few minutes here. So you can see there's still a lot of rust on the column. It's just surface rust. So next we'll put the pipe or the column back inside the PVC pipe. Careful not to let it go all the way to the bottom without slowing it down. Then we'll stand that column back up and strap it again to the column of my deck. Like so. Next we'll mix up the citric acid. So that column will hold one of these 5-gallon buckets basically. So I typically use, this is like a tablespoon scoop, and I use 1 tablespoon per gallon pretty much. So we'll put 5 in there or 6 in there, something like that. And then we'll mix up that citric acid with some water. And try to get that stuff to dissolve as much as possible. I like using as hot as I can get it water. Then we'll pour that directly into the column. Or the PVC pipe. And then we're going to top that off with just water from the hose to make sure that the column is completely covered. You'll see me kind of stick my fingers down inside the PVC pipe to see where the water level is. And we're going to let that soak in the citric acid for 24 hours. So next we're going to reclaim the simple green from the bin that we had all the main parts soaking in. And this is just a battery powered siphon that I'm using. You can get them from Harbor Freight or whatever. And I'm just using a paint disposable filter. I think it's like 25 micron or something like that. I don't remember exactly. To screen out the debris that gets caught up inside that simple green. But this allows me to reuse the simple green probably about 10 times before I throw it away and replace it. And, you know, it can be expensive because each one of those 2.5 gallons is roughly $20 or so. But it does a good job of degreasing and hopefully removing paint. And once we've got that simple green out of the bin, then we're going to rinse off all of those parts. We will also rinse off or rinse out the bin, because we're going to use that for citric acid later on. But rinsing off the parts, basically anything that has paint on it, I'm going to scrub it with a wire brush while I'm rinsing it to try to remove as much of that paint as possible. And the Craftsman paint, it's weird. I mean, I can strip one drill press by soaking it in the simple green, and then another drill press, the paint won't even be affected by the simple green. So in this case, the base, the paint is held on there pretty well. The bottom side of the table, same thing. And the paint that's on the belt cover, for instance, does want to lift a good bit, but there's still enough of it on there that it's not coming off really well. And the motor parts are similar, the end frames, and all of those motor mount parts, that paint barely even moving with the simple green. So we'll be using a stripper to strip the paint, or as much of the paint as we can get. And so my paint stripping method is 3 phases. You got the simple green that we just finished. Then you've got Citric strip, which is a non-toxic paint stripper. And then we will go to a wire wheel on the angle grinder after the fact. So here we're just rinsing off the parts, and then we'll dry them off with a towel so that we can apply the Citric stripper. The other reason I like this Citric strip is it has an aroma. It's obviously a citrus aroma, but it's not strong enough that it's kicking me out of the house. So I can do this in the basement, and the house may smell for a day, but it's not the end of the world. So basically, we're just going to paint the Citric strip onto these parts, and then we're going to put plastic over the top of them. So in the past, I've wrapped each part with saran wrap, But this time around, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to lay a piece of plastic over the top of them. And that's supposed to keep the paint stripper from drying out while it sits overnight. I'm applying it pretty thick, pretty liberally. To all of these parts. Now obviously we got to get the paint stripper off of these parts, and scrubbing them with a wire brush while you do that would be ideal. But we're going to wire wheel most of this stuff after the fact anyways, so I will be removing the paint stripper with a pressure sprayer. I've just got one of those cheap electric pressure sprayers that you can get at all of your big box stores. I think mine's from Northern Tool or Walmart or something. They're like $80 and they do the job just fine. So like I said, we will go ahead and cover that with the plastic and let that sit for 24 hours. All right, so while that's cooking up, we can go ahead and remove the column from the citric acid soak. So since we're not going to reclaim the citric acid, we can just pour it out. It's non-toxic. It's not going to hurt my lack of grass in the backyard. I think it's more weeds than grass at this point anyways. We'll pull the column out of the pipe. Then we're going to rinse the column in the pipe again. Now it doesn't look like all that rust is gone, but it is. And you'll see once we take it inside and dry it off that everything you're seeing on that column right now, or most of it, is just going to come right off with a towel. And we'll just wipe that down with a towel. Keep it from developing more rust, because it's going to be a week or two before we get to polishing that column. And we'll get the inside as well. We're just going to run that rag down through it. Like so. We're going to coat the inside of that column with WD-40. And if you're really feeling froggy, you could go ahead and paint the inside of that column with like a primer, and that'll keep it from rusting on the inside. I'm not terribly concerned about it rusting on the inside, but the WD-40 will slow that process down. They did not come from the factory with any kind of rust inhibitor, so all right, so now we're ready to start stripping the stripper off of these parts. And so we're just going to use the pressure washer and clean these up as much as possible. Get all that stripper off of there, remove as much of the paint as possible. Basically, for the base, this stripper didn't really do anything. Like I said, that paint that is on the base is crazy. The head, on the other hand, the paint removed from it pretty good. Now, because we're going to be painting these parts eventually, I don't want to have any of that paint stripper left on them. So after we've rinsed them off and removed as much of the paint stripper as we can, I'm going to go ahead and do another simple green soak for 24 hours on these parts. And that should remove any remaining paint stripper that's on them. We'll go ahead and hit a couple of them with the brush as we rinse them off. These smaller parts I'm doing on the inside because that pressure washer would have just blown them all over the yard. And some of that paint came off really well, and some of that paint isn't moving at all. But it's not the end of the world. It's just one more step in the process. All right, so here we are with the table. And before we do that simple green soak, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up the milled surface on the table. So I'm starting with 100 grit sandpaper and a little bit of WD-40 to act as kind of a cutting fluid. And we'll wipe that down, see if it's doing its job, and then use a new disc, 100, and then 150, and then 220. And we'll stop at 220. So this table is in pretty good shape. Next, we've got all the parts back inside that bin, and we're going to do the simple green, like I said, for another 24 hours before we move on to the citric acid soak. And that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. In the next video, we will remove all those parts and soak them in the citric acid, and then do a final paint removal for as much of the paint as we can before we move on to painting. So, as always, I appreciate the support. If you got questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below, and I will see you next time.